Hi, friends. Welcome to the Recover Your Life podcast. I'm your host, Bridget Blood. Together, we are building a community of men and women who are learning what it means to grieve well, rest well, and love well, to live the life we dream of. No one is left out of this grand adventure. Now is the time to recover your life. And today on the show, I get to have Christa Parodi, and I am so excited for you to be here. Welcome, Christa.
Yay! Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is so exciting. And, I want to build this to be a place that's really authentic. So before we get into our topic today, we want to share a little bit of behind the scenes. So as you're hearing this episode, we have already recorded this episode one time. And we were both dysregulated. And we decided to say, hey, that was not the best version of us. We had a really hard time connecting to our bodies. And we realized that we needed to have some more connection in our friendship for this to feel safe and good. And so I've said this to Christa already a bunch of times, but I'm so proud of us that this is what connection makes possible. Is that we get to engage in places that feel scary, that it's okay. I'm still learning what it means to podcast. This is so much more than I ever understood it to be, as now being in this seat and not just someone who listens to it. And so I want us to learn together. I want us to grow together. And in no way, shape, or form do I think that we failed it. I think that we rocked it of hey, let's figure out a way that works for us. So this is round two, but
this is round two.
We are excited to enter into this conversation today about play. And even before Christa shares a little bit for her story, I have always struggled with play. I think a lot of my childhood had a lot of me in the parent seat. And so play felt super unsafe to me. Of that can happen after everything is in line, and even using phrases in the past of give me the Z, give me the end. And once I've mapped every detail out to the end, then we might be able to put 20 minutes of play in. But from here to there, we have to control everything. And so it's been a journey for me to settle in to the permission to play again. And I want us to engage in just kind of asking the question, what would our lives look like if we really felt like we had permission in our adult bodies to play again? And the reason why I've invited Christa into this conversation is she models it so well, and perfectly imperfect on the journey, and have loved engaging. And we got to meet last year in person and have connected on social media this year. And you are one of the accounts that I just am it's always a peace bringing experience to me, where it feels fun. It feels inspiring. It feels super simple, but super meaningful and impactful.
Yeah.
And so I have just been deeply impacted by your bravery to press in to play. So as we kind of start off our conversation today, would you mind just kind of telling our crew, who are you? What do you do? What brings you life? And let's start there. Yeah. Who are you? What do you do? Okay. What brings you life?
Okay. Yay. Thank you. I loved everything you just shared, and I just love leaning into that too. And so who am I? Here I am in my early 50s and still discovering what it looks like to play.
Yeah.
And just realizing it's never too late. And so I'm just someone who's really grateful to be on this journey and to be finally really doing the work and just learning about compassion and just figuring it out and discovering new things, leaning into curiosity and just kind of backing up a little bit though to the podcast and just sort of being invited into something really new and feeling so honored and so excited. But it does, even right in this moment, I can feel that I feel different
Mm,
because you and I were able to lean into our humanity. We
mhm,
were both able to say, like, oh, like, did that feel playful?
mhm.
Because that's what we're really aiming for,
Yeah.
is like the safety of being able to show up as ourselves,
Mhm,
like the beauty of curiosity of leaning in and like, hey, I think I want to try, but like, is it okay? Like, is there permission for this? And so I would say that's yeah, that I've leaned into that a little bit more.
mhm,
And even as I've reflected a little bit of like, oh, like she's invited me to like talk about play and delight,
mm,
and that does feel like part of my original self,
mm.
but it's also been really fun to think about that it really for me doesn't just mean this like yippee, like wide
Yeah.
open, extroverted, just like out of control, like party, like there's so much to it. And there's been a
Mhm.
lot of behind the scenes stuff where I've really had to fight and like do the work and heal and
Yeah.
get comfortable with saying like, "Hey, can we do this again?"
Mhm.
So,
Ooh,
yeah.
drop my microphone. But
Uh-oh,
you're
that's all right.
it's all right. Um, so can we go back a little bit to your childhood? Like when you think about
Yes.
your introductory like memories of play, what did that look like? Kind of what were the systems of little Krista in her what was
Hmm.
happening in her world?
Yeah. Let's see. Well, I do think that like as a little girl, I did really feel like things were high stakes for me, and that's just that those words have just
Mhm.
been really unlocking for me too of like this has been a journey for me of learning what it feels like to come out of living so high stakes, and
Yep.
just really realizing, and you and I have even used the word like rigidity. Like, if you just
Yep.
tell me the rules and you tell me what's allowed, like I can follow instructions.
Mhm.
So I think play for me, yeah, it has looked a little more like permission to like, yeah, like what do you want to do, honey?
Mhm.
Noticing like what does help, what does feel good. So, yeah, for me, I did though as a little girl like love like setting up school and like
Mhm.
creating little atmospheres, like I had little like pet rocks and little, I would do
Mhm.
all these little things of like setting up, like a space to just kind of play and have imagination. And so that does feel like a good part of when I was a little girl engaging in that felt
Yeah.
really good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And so transitioning into adulthood, into marriage and parenting and just discovering more of yourself, like what has that journey been like?
That journey, I think I did sort of enter into getting married and then starting my family. Of course, like I would say most people, I had a real mentality of like, I want to do this right.
Mhm.
I want to read the books. I want to know all the things. And surely, if I follow a plan, like I just want to do right.
Mhm.
I want to help my kids like avoid pain.
Mhm.
I want to create, this, this story, that's
Mhm.
beautiful. And so, yeah, I do feel like as that young mom who I have so much compassion for
Yes.
now,
Mhm.
like not really judging her, but just being like, oh, like she was doing the best she could, but
Mhm.
being tender with her. But I definitely did really want to like create, I mentioned I think last time, but like the monogrammed lunch boxes and just if I can do all the right
Yeah.
things, so that gets really exhausting and that's a lot to carry after a while.
Mhm.
And so I just got really hungry and for like, oh, there's got to be more. And a real turning point for me was when I heard this song, and it's called The Inheritance.
Wow.
And I really, I knew the Lord, But when
Mhm.
I heard, when I heard this word in there of like, eh, he won't love you better when you become better.
Mhm.
You are loved 100% right now. I just
Mm.
like, I was like, really? I won't be loved better when I become better.
Wow.
But it was just that piece of my heart that was like, if you can just do a little bit better,
Mhm.
if you can just clean it up a little bit more and not have so many messes, not be so triggered, like
Mhm.
then you'll be okay. And
Mhm.
so I heard that song and I was like, ooh, like I gotta find out more about this, and then that led me to attending a really beautiful artisan gathering, and that's
Mhm.
when creativity got really introduced into my story, and I just saw like this beautiful expression
Yeah.
of people being creative, and I was like, I'm on to something with this.
Yeah.
I really want to learn more about this.
I
Yeah.
that is so beautiful because I think there is this space, and I think that we all connect to, because I know that I connect to it in my own story, is the right or wrong. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just do what's right. Even that word of like, oh, the right thing. I think even
Yes.
in this past week, like literally as we're recording last week, um, I started to just hit some triggers in my own story where
Mm-hmm.
I wanted rules. I wanted rules and I felt super unsafe. And so I started like texting my friend. She was like, "Hey, like what's happening? Like you're the way that you're communicating even over text feels very much like harsh and rigid and
Mm.
like you're like grasping for control. Like what am I missing here that this is happening?"
Mm. Yeah.
And even like having I was at it was funny. I was at my kitchen table and literally the only words I got out in prayer was Holy Spirit. Like that's all I got. There was nothing more than that. He
Mm.
said Holy Spirit. And he said,
Yeah.
"Hey, he's like, you're kind of acting like these people don't spend any time with me." And I just felt there were a couple of dynamics in
Mm.
my life where I was like, "Oh, this person feels unsafe. I don't feel cared for. Like, what if I don't have what I need? Like, what if?" And the
Mm.
Lord's just kind of like, "Hey, like people want to come towards you, people want to care for you, people want to honor
Yeah.
compassion and safety to you." And it was such a sweet moment because literally I was like not even trying, like I wasn't trying to pray, it literally was just my body needed to just like say something out loud. And so for me this journey of like leaning into that is becoming really curious. We talk here a lot in Recover Your Life what I call compassionate curiosity,
Mm. I
which is what
love that.
you've mentioned part of your story.
Yeah.
Um, and I always say like, please, if you're familiar with language like repentance, if that's been a part of your spiritual upbringing, I would love for us to come from a new angle where instead of trying to change our behavior, we're getting really compassionate and curious about what's happening for us on the inside when behaviors on the outside are not the person that we want to be.
Yeah.
Because if we're constantly um, judging or reprimanding or just saying you need to do the right thing, get better,
Mm-hmm.
we all know innately that that hasn't worked so far. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I found a lot of freedom in my own story in asking those questions and even the kindness of my friend, not to say, oh, you're being really controlling. You need to stop being controlling. It's like, hey, like
Yeah.
this is not the truth of who you are. Because, even back to when we talk about this childhood innocence, like we were designed for pleasure, delight, and play.
Mm. Yeah. Come on.
That is the true deep part of who we are. And a lot of a life is returning to that beauty. And it's okay that parts of that feel really scary. It's okay, even if you like, maybe you might connect to Krista's language of like, oh yeah, like this feels really high stakes to me. Um, that there is full permission to enter in and just to say, okay, like what does it
Mm.
look like to have compassion to the part of me that feels resistant to play? Um, and as we process this together.
Yeah. I love that.
I would love for you to
I,
dig a little bit into, you talk about the moment at the artist retreat. Can you tell us a
Yes,
little bit more about that story and how that was a pivotal moment for you?
totally. I would love to. And it does sort of tie into that little bit of a theme we've touched on is like that little part of like telling on ourselves
Mhm,
and just kind of breaking shame. But when
mhm,
I was at this gathering, I really went not really calling myself an artist. And so there was
mhm.
that little piece of shame of like, people would say, like, well, what kind of artist are you? And I was like, well, I scrapbook.
Yeah,
Or like, I don't even know, do I even belong here? Like, am I
yeah.
allowed to be here? I just knew something was really calling to me. And so
Mm,
I showed up by myself. And at the very last workshop I had signed up for, it was like, okay, let's paint. And I felt stuck.
mhm,
I felt scared. I felt like I don't really know how to do this.
mhm,
And so I literally raised my hand,
mhm.
and then the teacher came over and I just said like, "Oh, I don't even really know where to start."
Yeah.
And so I think just the power of like breaking shame, of just
Mhm,
being honest, of saying like, yeah, like I don't really know where to start. I'm a little bit stuck. And then with just so much compassion,
mhm.
she just leaned in and was like, "Oh." And she just stood behind me and she was just like, perfectionism and performance, like, no, like you're like out of the box, set free and play.
Wow.
And she's like, go over in the corner and like see what that girl over there is like doing. And
Mhm.
it again, it's that it doesn't that even feel like two little girls like
Yeah.
on the playground, like, what are you playing? Like, could I join in?
Mhm,
Would it be okay? And so it was just a really tender moment of like
mhm.
a woman I didn't even know who had on these jeans
Mhm.
where she literally like would like wipe her hands, like the
Yeah.
messy painted, hands, like wiping her hands like on her jeans. And I just remember like this like pain inside the lines girl was like, is
Yes.
this even allowed? Like, what
Yeah.
is this? I don't, but I want it.
Mhm.
And so she was just so generous with me.
Wow.
And I feel like that's another part of God that I
Mhm,
really saw as like, you know, there's just not scarcity, but like she was so generous with like her supplies, like
mhm,
you can use as much paint as you want. And
mm.
that just awakened something in me that was like, well, if you squirt this paint out, like you better use all of it. Like this was expensive paper, is there going to be enough? And so I just sat with her on the floor, which felt childlike, and
Mhm,
just sort of shoulder to shoulder and just swirling paint, like with my hands. And
mhm,
I just started to cry, and she was like, "Oh, like you can just let your tears, like fall into the canvas." And
mm.
I felt so much permission, and I
Yeah.
didn't have to know, like, is this painting going to be, the best? But that's part too where when I do get into creativity, it helps me a lot to say like, even if you don't show this to anyone,
Mhm.
it's still worth it. If
Yeah.
you never sell this, if it doesn't go anywhere, but you have permission to try
Mhm,
and to like ask yourself like, what do I want to do? And
mhm.
sometimes it works, and sometimes it's like, no, now I know to go this way. And so that's just part of it. But play to me also means like free to learn.
Yeah.
I want to be free to learn.
Mhm. I was listening to a workshop last week and by Jay Stringer, and one of the things that he brought up in that is one of those quotes that I want to have plastered on a wall or something. He talked about just healthy boundaries, and he said healthy boundaries
Mm,
expand the possibilities of play.
yeah.
And I that does create, I think, from someone where play has felt so extra, it's felt um, honestly, it's felt threatening, um,
Mm,
because I think that growing up in a system that had a lack of boundaries and a lack of me being able to fully step into the child role without being parentified, right? Because I think that's a
hmm.
psychological term for it,
Yeah.
where it was like into adulthood, I've had to say, okay, like, what does that I'm allowed to say, okay, like I can make a mess, but I can make a mess in this room and start there.
Mhm.
Or I can be wild and crazy and sing and run around, but it happens here. And I think just as we've talked about this whole inner experience, because it is, I think about, this art moment. I think about with me connecting with new people or this conversation with my friends, like the moments that we typically feel stuck, like they're presenting in really small moments. Like,
Mhm.
yes, we have big moments of pain, but typically these narratives are showing up in neutral or even like joy bringing spaces, but to us, because of what we've experienced, we might interpret them as being painful. And so for me, I love that idea of like, okay, like I still get to have agency in play. It's
Mhm.
not like, and maybe people have had an experience of like, oh, like come do this. I know for me too. This is funny. As we're processing this, I'm like I'm undoing even just some of my own stories of like of being um like in a moment with people doing fun things and I felt super dysregulated and didn't want to engage and I was forced to engage. And so even
Yeah.
that put the like, oop, nope. And that's what I love that what you share about that story was there was this permission, there was this love, there was this blessing from the
Mhm.
people around you. But
Yeah.
God honored your agency of like it's okay that the idea of someone putting paint on their jeans feels like oop against the rules can't do it. But
Yes.
as you leaned into that compassion for you in that moment of the like this is emotional and I do want this. There's this part of me, that returning to the true
Mhm.
self of like, I long to play and I long to have delight and I long to just like step into a story that's bigger than me. Like, all of this swirls inside of us in that moment. Um, yeah. Any thoughts on that? Just kind of as I'm sharing.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And it does feel like a little bit of a word that we're both sort of like touching a little
Mm-hmm.
bit is safety.
Mm-hmm.
Like feeling like you will have a choice and
Yeah.
that like there are no musts or shoulds,
Mm-hmm.
because that never feels good.
Mm-mm.
So it does feel kind
Mm-hmm.
to yeah, check in with people and
Yep.
really like ask them like, well, what would feel good to you? Like, would it
Mm-hmm.
be okay if we, just colored? Like, would it
Mm-hmm.
be like what, yeah, like what kind of game would you want to play? Like, what
Yeah.
kind of creativity does feel good to you? But
Mm-hmm.
that just feels honoring and it does feel like kindness, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, and that's who we want to be with ourselves
Mhm,
and with others, and it's how God is with us, like I
mhm,
just feel like like his gaze is just like, oh yeah, like we can take our time here.
mhm.
We can go slow.
Yeah.
What would you like to do? What's
Mhm.
something fun that you would like to do? Yeah, and he listens.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. One of the first ways I've connected with your artwork was a friend of ours had brought home a bunch of your bookmarks that you make. And I
Yes.
have one. It's sitting on I don't even use it as a bookmark because it means so much to me. I have it on
Oh.
it's right by my lamp on my coffee table next to my couch. And it says, um, I will sit here until you feel safe. And
Mm.
that's what, and so for me, I felt like that was a huge invitation from the Lord of the like, you don't have to arrive or get there quickly. Like, if this
Yeah.
takes 2 minutes, great. If this takes 2 years, great. Like, I'm
Yes.
okay. Like, this is not something where this feels high stakes and scary. And then we're just going to have this moment where we go, yay, I'm worth play. Yay, I'm worth fun. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just going to magically shift. Like, there's kindness in it from God, from ourselves, and from others that we will like, we want to sit, we want to participate in the like, we're here as long as
Yes.
it takes. And that there's no like, you don't win a gold medal for finishing early, that it is a what does it look like to establish safety for you. And so I'm curious just a little bit about that place of, safety in play. And I know your journey
Mhm.
in investing in your own emotional health. Like, kind of, can you tell us a little bit about that story? How um, stepping into that space has helped create safety to expand play?
I love that. Yeah, well, one thing when you were sharing about the bookmark, like, oh, like I'll sit with you and like we can
Mm-hmm.
take our time. It did make me think of like consulting, and so
Mm-hmm.
even with like being in spaces where like I have been able to receive like care for my heart, and as
Yeah.
I do step into offering that for others too, I
Mm-hmm.
can remember really feeling like I need to get this all tidied up and
Mm-hmm.
fixed in 6 sessions or less.
Yep.
And like I'm going to go in with notes and I need to tell the story quickly so that, we can get to fixing it, and just
Mm-hmm.
give me the steps again, back to like I'm good at following directions. I can be, I can check boxes. And so learning how to slow down
Mm-hmm.
and to really sometimes even in a session, spending time like what would look like grounding, and then just even doing like some breathing, like there can be, and there really has been like resistance in that area of like, no, um like let's get to it. But
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a lot that I have learned about learning to just regulate
Yeah.
my nervous system and just slowing things down a little bit. And I love, even this has been on a bookmark, but like slower is faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I do gather people like for little small groups and stuff, like I really will just sort of like slow it down and just have
Mm-hmm.
them like, oh, like you're safe here. We're sitting in our chairs. And then I have this yummy, delicious bowl of like these oils, and I'll pass them around and just have everyone like just select one. Because that even feels good to me, of like
Mm-hmm.
giving people choice, like
Mm-hmm.
which one kind of catches your eye, and
Mm-hmm.
then just taking the time even just to like smell the oil. You can put it on, you
Mm-hmm.
can put it on your paper. But just entering into a time even before we share, but to just slow our bodies down to like smell an oil, to breathe it in. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just think all of that just prepares the way,
Yep.
and isn't a waste.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually really helpful.
Yeah. So, what in the spaces, you've mentioned the word resource, that's really important to you. As you've been on this
Hmm.
journey for you, and now being able to facilitate places and spaces to invite others into play, what does that look like for your family? And what does that look like professionally or in the coaching setting?
Yeah. Let's see. So yeah, inviting people in. Oh, Bridget, like I love it. I love even just really like even just sitting with the word like invitation. It feels so fun.
Mhm.
And back to sort of regulating, and something that I feel like has been fun, and sometimes I'll like do stories on
Yeah.
Instagram, about the cold plunge. But someone came over yesterday for the first time to kind of like, yeah, do the cold plunge with us as a family. And I just felt giddy and excited.
Mhm.
And I was like, yeah. But I just love inviting people in. I think I have a special heart to just, because it's been so transformative for me. I just feel tender to like invite people in to like, hey, like trying something new is really brave, and I'm so excited to share this, to
Yes.
whatever level is like fun for you. But like, oh, like come on in. The water is fine. The water is
Mhm.
cold, but the water is also fine.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, cold plunging, and then just for family, kind of even going back to when I was like, oh, like I have so much compassion for
Mm.
for Krista as a young mom,
Mhm.
who like was really hyper, like hyper vigilant, like just yeah, just trying so hard. So
Mhm.
now as I have all my kids are in their 20s, and so now as they come home, like I feel more mindful and I feel more intentional about like, yeah, how can we be together? How can we participate in play and not make things really high stakes?
Mhm.
And so sometimes I do create like, yeah, like an invitation for us to do
Mhm.
something creative. And again, it's an invitation, because
Mhm.
I don't ever want to like, all right, everybody, sit down.
Mhm.
Mom has a plan.
Mhm.
uh, it might look like that a little bit sometimes, but for the most part, I want my heart to be like, yeah, you're invited in to
Mhm.
however you feel comfortable to participate, but this is yummy
Mhm.
and let's have connection, But
Yeah.
that's the real goal for me of play is
Yeah.
like connecting.
Mhm.
I want to connect.
Mhm. I've seen you do this for holidays too, with like the gingerbread houses or the Easter eggs, like
Yeah.
things like that, where
Uh-huh.
they're fun and they're connecting and they're like that childlike thing that still matters, right? Is still a part
Yeah.
of that, and it can be, more of the word that's coming to mind is like designed play. Like there's some
Mm-hmm.
intentionality to it, but also like the cold plunge or the singing in the car or the, dancing around the kitchen. Like it's just kind of spontaneous. It happens. It feels good. It feels connecting. Um, but that's just really cool as well. So can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about as far as your consulting, like with your Saturday school and your groups that you walk people through? What does
Mm.
that look like?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I really do love to, yeah, invite, like we've said, like invite people in. And I have this, like, even this room that I'm sitting in right now. This is kind of my little studio slash, like, where I host the workshops and stuff. But I have this really big, chunky, fantastic table, and I
Mm-hmm.
bought it at a nice furniture store and I've had it for years now, but this table in and of itself feels like a resource to me because when I first started using it, I was doing a little project with the kids when they were younger, and I got paint like on this expensive table.
Yeah.
Like, oh no. And so I was a little freaked out about it. And oh, like, shout out to my husband. He's like, Krista, it's so okay. What you need to do now is just get some paint on the other side. And I was
Yeah.
like, come on. So this table has like it's just a piece of art in and of itself, but there's like marks and drips and messes like all over it. And so, yeah, it does look like for me to gather people like around this table
Mhm.
that has like story and messes like already in it
Mhm.
feels like permission. And
Yeah.
so I do love, and I'm about to start like my third little round of just gathering a few people, and it's just time to go slow. It's time, like I really love encouraging, women like, yeah, do this, your heart is worth this time and
Mhm.
money and space. Like your heart is worth investing in. And so, yeah, it just does look like 2 hours of uninterrupted time where we
Mhm.
get to share and process and create and keep a journal and smell the oils.
Mhm.
And even in the journal feels low stakes because like prepping pages is just like, oh, like, yeah, just prepping these pages, and again, it can be just for you, and that's enough.
Mhm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And one of the phrases of invitation that you've mentioned that matters to you, that is a very normal thing to incorporate, right? But might, be part of that transition process of lowering the stakes. Um, is can we do something fun together,
Mm, yeah.
right? So,
Right.
do you have any like cool stories about? what it's looked like when you've been brave to ask for play, to ask for connection in your life. Like what connection has formed out of the bravery to even ask a question like that?
Can we do something fun together? Yeah. Well, what that question can be used in so many ways. It is a
Mhm.
question that I did learn from a friend who has some really, really beautiful journaling prompts. But
Cool.
that can even like it's called like questions for Emmanuel. But
Cool.
that that's even just like, oh, like just to even like ask that
Mhm.
to God and just be like, oh, like is there anything fun that like we can do together,
Mhm.
and just to realize like, yeah, like he has time for that with me.
Yep.
And that again, back to like, it's not that like, oh, like, we're projects or like, we
Mhm.
can only really focus on like fixing, but it's like, wow, like what would
Mhm.
it look like to do something fun together? And then, yeah, even then letting that kind of move into like, we can even ask that question to ourselves, like,
Mhm.
when Bridget
Absolutely.
has time, you can just take yourself on an artist date and be like,
Yeah.
oh, like, what would be fun that like I would want to do right now?
Mhm.
And then yeah, it's brave to ask, other people to join us in that too. So
Mhm.
I think I think going back to even when I was talking about the gathering, like this friend that I met there, like it did really feel like all of this does have to do, with relationship.
Mhm.
And but yeah, just to join in with someone, to lean in, to have that moment where it was like risky for me to raise my hand in the class, and then but like look what happened,
Yeah.
like I'm so grateful that like I did raise my hand and say like I don't even know where to start, and then
Mhm.
just this beautiful thing unfolded. And even yeah, with the family, like, hey, would you guys be willing to try doing joy stories, and
Mhm.
like we'll do these together. But yeah, it can feel really risky, but
Mhm.
wow, like yeah, there's been some really beautiful things that have come from it. So, yeah, I encourage people to, raise your hand, take a little risk, and you never know.
Mhm. One of our
Yeah.
values at Recover Your Life is being people who grieve well. And for me,
Mm,
my heart in that is it's not to communicate that when hard things happen that we just go, oh, this is great, this is wonderful, like God has a plan, just move through it, and we feel very distanced from the pain. But we actually want to be really close and really compassionate to what's happening and to be kind to ourselves in that process. And I know for
yeah.
me, like when we walk through seasons of grief, like I really want to hunker down, like, and play in those types of seasons feels super extra. And maybe even like there might be shame in it of like I'm walking through this really hard thing with a family member or a friend, like I don't even know if I deserve to play when the pain feels really hard. So how have you navigated
Yeah.
that? What does that look like to engage in seasons of deep pain? Like obviously we all have pain moments throughout the day. But if we have listeners that are like, no, pain feels so magnified to me in this season, how do we engage in play and what does play offer us in seasons of pain?
That's good, Bridget. Yeah, because again, going back to when I was like, yeah, this doesn't have to just look like, it's just a celebration all of the time, but
Mm-hmm.
pain is, yeah, pain is a real part of our lives, and it's okay to be messy and to be in pain and still want to engage in some play, or even maybe a better word would be, like resource
Mm-hmm.
and compassion. So again, I think it just is really helpful, not to like force, but
Mm-hmm.
just to lean in with tenderness and just to ask, our own hearts, like, well, what would feel helpful to you right now,
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I mean, it can just be. the smallest of things, but just really paying attention to those things, and whether it's just a song, and the slowing down feels really good too, like, oh, like, in a real season of grief. Um, yeah, but just checking in with our hearts to notice like what would feel helpful. And sometimes
Mhm,
it is just slowing down and like laying on the ground and just listening to a song, over and
mhm,
over. And or just, yeah, if there's a certain color, and like, yeah, just filling, your art journal with that color, over and over and over, that it doesn't really have to make sense.
mhm,
It doesn't have to be, anything that, you even show anyone. But
mhm,
I think just leaning in and slowing down and being curious and being gentle with ourselves, um, and even back to the podcast, like, oh gosh, like here we are, two gals figuring out together, but just that language of not being so critical, with ourselves, and just to be able to say like, oh, like, you've never been here before,
yeah,
it makes sense that this does probably feel a little high stakes, but
mhm,
you're not alone. You can tell Bridget how you feel,
mhm,
and so whatever the pain is, like, you can just say like, yeah, I haven't navigated this
yeah,
before. It makes sense that I don't know exactly how to
mhm,
do this. I'm learning, I'm recovering
mhm,
my life,
mhm,
so I can figure it out as I go.
mhm. As you're talking, like a phrase that kind of keeps coming to my mind is like, we're worth our wants.
Mm,
And
yeah.
I think, especially in a religious context, like we've kind of seen it as maturity to surpass our wants, our desires, that there's just something where we outgrow humanity to the point where, um, like, kind of the like the whole I want God's will for my life thing. Um, there's a really good book by I want to say Matthew Donahue. I have fear that that's not the correct name. I
Mm.
think it is though. He has a book called "Finding God's Life for My Will," and it's just
Ooh.
it's a really fun, playful, like you cry through it, you laugh through it book. And it's just kind of this idea of, again, returning to God's kindness, that like he doesn't want you to live your life without you. And
Mm.
somewhere lost in translation, whether that's the actual translation of scripture, or leaders and communities that have developed their own cultural context to what the Bible means, like we've my experience has been this loss of like, well, if I can just get rid of me and make this whole thing
Mm.
about God, like somehow that will be the arrival piece.
Yeah.
And the more that I engage with God, even like for those of us that have watched the show The Chosen,
Mm.
that feels really special to me. Like even the language that I've used in watching that show was like, oh, I finally get to see what God feels like to me.
Yeah.
Like there is this, like his body language, like I watch those episodes and I'm like, you have to have spent time with real Jesus to know that he winks like that, to know that his body comes
Mm.
close like that, to know that like when he's being sarcastic in a really high stakes moment, like it is with the kindest compassion and joy that he engages. And so
Yes.
I think there's this place of like you are worth your wants, like, and if your wants is to put paint on a table, you're worth that. And if your want is
Yeah.
to engage in fun romance with your partner, you're worth that. And if fun feels like, I don't know, riding horses or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may be, have some fear because now I've lost you,
Uh-oh.
but you still
Mm.
see you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll try it. You can still
Okay.
see me.
Yeah, you're a little bit fuzzy, but I can see you.
Okay, feeling some fear that we're not the same. Okay, back to the show. We'll
Back to
see
the
if
show.
it works. Oh,
Aw.
I even feel some anger that is. I felt like we were at a good spot and it
I know.
ditched out. But whatever play looks like for you, you have
Mhm.
permission to want. You have permission to
Yes.
dream. You have permission to um, want to have fun. Like even
Yes.
like we talked about this, like in pain, to say, I want to play. I like
Yeah.
this last weekend I got to go to the lake for the first time here in Tennessee. And for me, it was one of those things where I felt like I needed to hold out a little bit because I really wanted to go with a friend. I did not want to go by myself. I do lots of things by myself. Our friend Courtney Leo, who we've had on the podcast, she is the queen of solo dates. So even we talked about that, like
Oh,
she's
yeah.
so good at crafting language for what does it look like to go have a date with yourself and to lean into fun for you. And there is 100% a place for that. But I felt like in this, what I wanted in play at the lake, I wanted to be with a friend. And
Yeah.
so we went, a new friend we had connected at church a couple months ago, and it was just like, hey, this works for our schedule. And so she and I got to go, and it was 100 degrees and we were in the water most of the time, and there was all these little kids, and it just was like to have fun, to play, to connect. And it was like that's what I wanted, and even started with that permission
Yeah.
of like, it's not immature of me to want to have friends to play with. That even like I think
Yes.
about, the picture that you've mentioned of the playground. Like there is this piece of us that like it's okay that if at 30, 40, 50 you go, "Oh yeah, play feels high stakes because this one time when I was 6, I asked
Mm.
Billy to play with me and he didn't." And that got like
Yeah.
there's a little part of me that's stuck. Like it's okay to learn to go back into that. Even a place like that, maybe, that might be a helpful practice, is to say, maybe if you think about your story where play has been painful, what would it
Mm.
look like to return to those places with compassion?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so I know, like for me, like going on the swings, I like whenever I'm like at someone's house that has a play, like a swing set, or like at the park, it's like
Yeah.
I want to go swing. I literally, when I was a kid, I used to say, my favorite sport is swinging. I'm
Yeah.
like, that's my favorite. Like, I'm not gonna play soccer, but I'm gonna be on the swings, and I'm gonna be the best person ever. Um, and so yeah, just what giving yourself permission to answer whatever your heart needs to answer. Um, that there are places for you to say no and to have agency.
Mm.
There's
Mhm.
places for it not to work. I think, even the delight of our first podcast recording on play, right? We felt really dysregulated and it was really hard for us to connect. And it's okay that that didn't go I mean, not, I don't want to say that didn't go right, that it didn't capture the fullness of what play can be. And now, like, even in our conversation today, like, my body feels the difference of like,
Oh, yeah.
we're here, we're connected, we're fun, we're safe. Like,
Yes.
there doesn't have to be rules, even in that, of like, I feel my heart be like, oh, there's not really an answer. And that's okay. Like, there's not really a next step. Like there is one if you for what, but it's whatever step you want to take. Like wherever you want to
Yes.
go, like there's permission, and that you're trusted to, like that our
Mm.
hearts are good and that we
Yeah.
can trust ourselves. I've talked about that a ton. Is
Yes.
for me self-trust. Like that you can trust you, and
Yeah.
when your body, when your soul, when your spirit says, "Hey, I want to go for a walk," or hey, I want to draw with sidewalk chalk, or whatever it is, that you can trust you. And it's okay that we learn, like
Yeah.
we develop a friendship with ourselves too. And so there may be experiences that you have and you go, oop, that wasn't super connecting. That's not the kind of friendship that I want to build with myself, God, and others. And we go, okay, that didn't work, but we can shift and we can try something new and we can find something that does
Yes.
feel, and it will play like, I think it's the both and. It's the like
Mhm.
safety does expand play, and there's a part of play that helps us return to innocence, that helps
Mhm.
restore our bodies and our brains of like, you are okay. You are not dying.
Yes.
Like you are living
Oh.
and life is worth living. And so there's
Yeah.
the both and I think that we get to be compassionate in the in between of wherever you need to start. If you're like, hey, I need to establish a little more safety for me to engage, great. If you're like, no, I feel ready, I want to take that next step to play and watch the fruit of that be more safety. They're the
Mm-hmm.
both sides of the coin, I think, in reality.
Yeah, that's so good, Bridget. Yeah.
Mm. Well, so grateful for our conversation today. As we wrap up,
Yay.
2 questions for you. Number one, how do our listeners connect with you? Where can they find you online if they want to continue conversations with you, or just to say, hey, thanks, I appreciated the podcast.
Aw, so good. Yes. So, Christa Parodi, you can find me on Instagram, just using my name, Christa Parodi. And then also I have a website, and that's a way to find out a little more and connect with me. So I would love that. Thank you.
Yes, and I will have links to what we've discussed today. I also want to include the song that you mentioned and
Okay.
the journal. Those were two really good
Yeah.
resources. I
Okay.
think that would be great.
Perfect.
So people can find those in the show notes.
Okay.
And last question, just kind of as we wrap up, um, anything lingering in your heart of kind of, we've covered a lot of ground today as
Mm-hmm.
we kind of, well, I'm gonna ask you this question. Would you be willing to commission people and just kind of pray a blessing of permission for play as we close?
Absolutely. Yes. And before we do really close though, I just feel like, and maybe this is part of it too, but I can remember hearing a teaching, or there was some phrase in there along the lines of, and it was like, oh, Holy Spirit, chicken or beef,
Yes.
and just this again, like, this high stakes pressure of like, I have to pick the right one.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, like, what if like or God even leans in with us and is like,
Mhm.
oh, honey, like, well, what would sound good to you today,
Yeah.
And another one of my kids, when he was in high school, I was like, oh, like, should he play football or not play football? And then I realized, like, oh, like, if he plays football, it's gonna be okay, and if he doesn't play football, it's gonna be okay.
Hmm.
So yeah, I guess that my blessing or my encouragement would be, yeah, for any heart out there who does really feel like things have been so high stakes, I just invite you to, yeah, leaning in to just realizing like it's such a journey. Yeah, and there's so much room to pivot and to edit and to be messy and just to lean into kindness and God's heart, which is so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, Kristen,
Amen.
thank you so much for being with us today. So
Thank
grateful for you
you.
and your friendship in this conversation. And friends,
Oh.
we would love to hear from you. So please feel free to reach out. If this has been impactful to you, share it with a friend. It's so helpful just for how the technology of how this stuff works. If you subscribe
Hmm.
or you write a review on the podcast, whether on iTunes or you can engage in Spotify. You can watch the video, or on YouTube, you'll see the video version of this podcast. Whatever feels good to you. If you're more of an audio listener, great. You have those options. If you like to see the video, you have those options on Spotify and YouTube. But again, check in. Love to hear from you, and can't wait to see you next time on the Recover Your Life podcast.
Mm. Yay.